Okay, well, hello everyone and good morning. Welcome to our Fridays with Fiscal for February 2026. My name is Amanda. I'm here to talk us through budgeting today. So we're going to talk about budgeting for the new year. We're going to talk about budgeting to new accounts. We'll go through examples with the scenarios, with the proposed amounts, and with actually applying the new budgets. Um, Before we jump into that, though, I do have some exciting news. We have a special addition to the session today. So, I'm going to go through all of the budgeting as planned to start, which is usually about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes. So that'll still be the beginning of our training. In addition to that, we also have Lori Nye here, and she's going to jump on after we wrap up budgeting. And we know for USPS, the overtime and double time, blended overtime, that's like a hot topic right now. So my understanding is we have some updates coming. So Lori's going to come on and do a little addition to the session to go through and explain some of those updates for you. So after budgeting's done, if you want to hear about that, definitely make sure you stick around. I know this is kind of a longer session then, so we are recording everything. When we put up the recording, we'll split everything into chapters. So whether you're looking for the budgeting part or the overtime part, it'll be easy to figure out where each of those start and end. So I just want to make sure everybody knows ahead of time, so plan for that. Um, yeah, so let me see. Okay, so we'll kick off with budgeting first. Um, this is I like doing this session. We do this one, regularly every year, and it's always interesting. It's always good to kind of look through the process. And, each year we have sort of different topics we can kind of touch on. So I think you may like to see some of my examples this year. So we start in the wiki. This is where we usually kick off, and I'm going to go right to the USAS documentation. And once we're in here, we have the budgeting page. Now, a lot of times I'm going right to one of the detailed pages because budgeting has two parts on that menu. It has scenarios and it has proposed amounts. For budgeting, this is the one where it's really helpful to just click right on your budgeting heading. This explains to you, the difference between scenarios and proposed amounts and the link to those pages. But we also have this green box here, and this has links to the step-by-step that kind of incorporates the entire process of those two together. So we have a scenario click here for proposed amounts for the next fiscal year, and another for making budget adjustments to the current fiscal year. I'm going to touch on both of these. We're mainly going to focus on the process with proposed amounts for next fiscal year. I know, especially with the move up of the five-year forecast, how some of the changes are going. Budgeting is happening now. So we're going to focus on that. I will touch on the differences if you are making adjustments towards the end of my session as well. So let's kick off. Oh, you know what? And I'm jumping right in to where we need to go. I want to say, as we always do, if you have questions along the way, I totally have my chat open. I'm keeping an eye on that. Feel free to unmute. I'm totally okay with that. If you have questions, let me know. Um, okay. So we have our budgeting steps that we're going to go through. Now, the first thing to sort of keep in mind is for budgeting, and let's make sure I have my software all logged in and loaded here. So we have our budgeting menu, and there are two parts. We have scenarios, and then we have proposed amounts. And the first part here, when we talk through the scenarios, they allow for the creation of the budget scenario, but it's basically like the first preliminary step where you're gathering all of like, here's what my budget is going to be. This is like a work zone. This is your construction zone. This is where you're putting the first initial plan together. Eventually, those are going to get promoted over to your proposed amounts. And that's where, when they're in that stage, they'll be able to show as next year proposed on like your actual account page. And then the final step is to actually go ahead and apply those so that they're actually set as the budgets for the next year. So we sort of have a phase, we sort of have phases in this process, and these different pages connect with some of those phases. Let's see. Okay, I just want to make sure I hit everything. So, the other thing while we're talking about the scenarios, because this is where we start, um, we can see, you can kind of see on here, I have from each year, we do our budgeting trainings. So we have 25, we have 26. We can come in here, and if we view this one from last year, we can clone year to year. So, getting a scenario set up where it has the certain sheets and everything that they would regularly use, it's good to sort of have that out here, and then they could go ahead, clone for the new year. So we're going to do that for our example today. We're going to clone 26 to make our base for our 27 accounts. Um, but the other thing that's important about this when you see here, even with this test, is we have different sheets. We have, cafe, high school. Those are expenditure sheets, but we also have revenue sheets in here. So when you think about a scenario, the scenarios are intended to be, well, I should say this is always a hard part because there are multiple ways to do things. As always with the software, there are multiple ways to do things. Generally, I think of the scenarios as it would have everything that would need to be budgeted for that year. All like the expenditures and the revenues together in one scenario. And then those get pushed forward to be applied as the budgets. Um, the situation where you may have multiple scenarios is potentially it's like if negotiations go this way and it's this percent like increase in my salaries, this is going to be scenario one. Otherwise it's going to be this scenario, and either one or the other scenario of budgets would get pushed over to the proposed amounts. That said, there totally are situations I've heard of where some districts do multiple scenarios. That just takes more planning, and you just have to kind of understand what's showing at what phase. Because the key is when you push over a scenario, it's going to replace all proposed amounts for the entire year. So that's the part we're kind of planning for. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the proposed amounts. Okay, so we've cloned our scenario. Let's go ahead and give this a name. Budgeting 2027. Can you believe we're budgeting for 27? Um, we could give this a description if we wanted to. What I like to do at this step after cloning is to go ahead and just save it, to make sure that I save the new one that I've cloned. And then I can come back in here to edit and change around my sheets. But that is always a good step that I like to do. Um, so now we have sort of the basics, and um let's flip back over here. Actually, you know what I was gonna do? Okay, I found this new trick with combining your tabs. And that's not the one I wanted. Let me see. No. This is what I want to do. Okay. Of course, I wasn't going to nail that when we're doing it live. Okay. So, if we do this, we can sort of see both of our windows at the same time. And I have it kind of zoomed in, so I don't know how well this is going to go, but this is our walkthrough. Here's our software, right? So we went through the scenarios. This is talking about creating a brand new one, or we went ahead and cloned it. Our next step is creating a new budgeting sheet within the scenario. So let's get this looking a little bit better here. Um, so what we can do is click on the create button at the bottom, and each of these sheets can be a different grouping of account codes. So if we want to create a new one. Now, what we're going to do, what I want to do for our examples today is we're going to focus on the general fund. And one of the reasons we're going to focus on the general fund is because I know that there are new accounts within the general fund from some of the AOS changes that they may need to be budgeting to, that they may need to be creating. And so we're going to do some examples revolving around those accounts, just as we kind of talk through the budgeting options. So for this first sheet, We're just gonna do, let's say we want just all of like the main um accounts. Like we want, let's see. Maybe I don't want to do my split window thing. I was very excited about this split window thing, but sometimes we don't want to force it. So, let's uncombine these. We'll do that later if it makes sense, but I don't want to. I realize now that I'm zoomed in so much, it might be not so easy to see, and I want to make sure you can see everything in this window because there's a lot. So, okay. So what we're looking at here is this is going to let us add another sheet to our scenario, right? And this view is going to let us decide what's going to be included in that sheet. This is set up a lot like our report writer is set up or like our report customizer. So if you've ever been in there, this will look similar to that. And this first thing that we want to look at is type. So right now we have budget. So this sheet is going to pull expenditure accounts. If I wanted to pull revenue accounts, I could choose anticipated revenue instead. So each sheet would be one or the other expenditure or revenue, budget or anticipated revenue. So we're going to stick with expenditure accounts for our examples today. So we'll click budget. I gave my sheet a name. And then I see here I have two different tabs. So the first one is properties. And this is going to decide, we'll look at the spreadsheet after we create this so we get a better visual of that. But this is going to decide what columns do I want to see on my budgeting sheet? What do I want to have for reference? What's going to help me be able to view the data I need in order to enter in the budgets? And so all of these beginning columns with the account codes, the ID, you want to leave those there. But you definitely have some flexibility on these additional fields. So we have like the prior year expendable and expended amounts, this current year's expendable and expended amounts, encumbrance, unencumbered. If you want to remove any of those, you can. So for the purposes of our example, it's just this X button here. Simple as that. Click the X. You can remove any of the columns that maybe they don't want to see on there. Those can come right off. Additionally, anything on this side list could be added. So if there's something else that they would want to have on their sheet for budgeting, this could be added here. So for our example, usually maybe like a 2 years prior. So we have our prior year expended, which we could move. So we just click and drag to move. So prior year expended, 2 years prior expended, 3 years prior expended, we could add on there. And so now those will show as columns in our budgeting sheet. The other thing we can do is configure the filters. So whereas the properties determines what are the columns that we're seeing, the filters is going to determine what are the rows, what accounts are going to be included in this budgeting sheet. It is important when you're making these budgeting sheets, each account should only be in one of the budgeting sheets. I believe we have like a future improvement to make it so that you can't put them in multiple sheets, but right now you could. And you got to be careful with that because if you have it like say with a budget in one sheet, but zero in another sheet, depending on the order that it goes over to proposed amounts, it could end up as not the figure you want. So filtering becomes important when you're looking at your sheets because you kind of can plan out like which grouping you want for each of these budgeting sheets. Now we're going to do a couple different sheets for the general fund because I want to pull out those special cost centers that end in X. For this one though, I think I just want like my cash account that's like my 001 zero special cost center, which, and that would include any of the like underlying like the non-9 special cost centers. We'll pull out, I do have some special cost centers that are not the ones ending in X. We'll pull those out separate. I believe that's my plan. Oh no, no, actually we're gonna pull that in this sheet. So we're gonna pull everything except for my special cost centers that end in X in the general fund. Um, and Sophie, I've already said this once, but I'm going to say it again. There are multiple ways to do things sometimes. So I thought this was also a good example for us to look at some different filters we could use. So I'm not promising that this is like the most convenient way that you would do this filter, but we get to look at a couple different operations. So ride with me here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to come in and go to my code and let's pull the fund over. I can just click and drag and we're doing general fund. So this one's easy. We're just going to say equals 001. And then let's pull over our special cost center here. And let's say, okay, hang on. Let me look at my notes. No, you know what? Gosh, I lied. I have a screenshot for myself, but um, undo. Hold that thought. We are going to do a separate budgeting sheet for the 9,000 special cost centers. Okay. Okay, just kidding. So we'll get there in a second. Um, and I guess I can explain this real quick. So this code right here is going to be, this is going to match what's the code on the expenditure account because we're talking about budgets, right? So when I open code, all of these fields are special cost center. So I could do, oops, that's function. I could do like, okay, here's the fund, here's the special cost center, and do like equals and equals. One risk though with this is that if when I'm doing the cash account that's all zeros, not all of my special cost centers might be all zero. If it's 0001, that would still be part of my, my special cost center, my cash account that's all zeros. And so if I filter on the expenditure account code in with these, that I could maybe lose stuff. So what I'm going to do instead is let's do the cash account. Let's pull the full account code. And so see, since I opened up cash account up here, the full account code is from the cash account. And so if I do this, I could do equals, and that will ensure that this sheet gets me everything that's underneath this cash account, even if it's one of those special cost centers that rolls up into this cash account. So this is our first one. We'll keep it simple here. And we'll save this sheet. Go ahead and create this. Okay. So, and this gives you a little message here. Sometimes this does take a bit. I realize I also probably should have filtered on active for this. So, this may take a bit, but let's go. It'll take just a minute, but let's go back over to our walkthrough and see where we are here. So, creating a budget sheet. So that's what we just did. This goes through, properties, our configure filters, save the sheet. We get our confirmation. Um, Here we go. Okay, so budget sheet successful. And now you see we have this in our grid here. Um, I want to go in. We're going to look at things a couple different times. I know we're going to talk about these buttons. I know by now, many of you have, seen budgeting before. So, we're going to talk about these options, but let's like use them as we need them here a little bit. So this spreadsheet, I want to fix this because I actually did want this to be all active accounts only. So we can use this regenerate button. And this brings us back into the view of being able to update our sheet. Now, I'll show you, we're going to talk about this again in a minute, and I'll tell you more about some of the cautions of this. But in this case, we literally just created this sheet, so we can just, we don't have to worry too much about coming back in and updating this. So let's make sure we only have active accounts in this sheet, and then we'll save it again. Hopefully it saves a little quicker this time, but that'll just take a second. And then once this saves, what we're going to do is we'll take a look at it. I'm going to take you in the edit mode so we can see what we created here with the accounts that we, or with the columns that we added on. All right. Okay. So so the first option in our grid here is edit. And if we open this, this gives us a view that we can see in the software of the sheet that we created. So let me open this up a little bit. And on here we have a couple different options. Let's see. Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself because I have kind of a plan where I want to talk about some things at certain times here. Um, Yeah, we'll go into it. So the first thing I want to point out here, we're looking at the columns we have. Here's all of our initial columns that we sort of started with. We saw those when we were doing the selecting properties. And then we had our prior year expended, prior 2 years prior, 3 years prior, all of that information posed in here when you're looking at these sheets, probably one of the most important columns, if not the most important column, is this one that is starts with PA. PA means proposed amount. And so in this case, we see PA 2027. This is what needs to be filled out for the budget. So if I want my budget for this to be $5,000, that would need to be filled out there. Um, this also can a formula can be used. So if I wanted to come in here and say like equals, let's make it, the prior year expendable, I could do that and then I could drag that formula down and I could use that just like kind of how Excel works. So those could be entered in here. There is a way to extract this to Excel that we'll take a look at in a little bit. But that's sort of the basics of like viewing or editing within here. Um, Let me just see. Okay, yeah, I want to talk about this ID column. We'll talk about that when we actually get to the part where we take it to spreadsheet. So that's what we're going to see in here. Go ahead and accept and we'll save our budgets in there. Let's go ahead and do a couple more sheets though that we want to have in here. So let's go ahead. We'll create again. And whoop, let's do the 9,000s. Now, the other thing too, so, and again, they could do this however they want with pulling like the general funds. Maybe, they do have those together. Maybe they have everything from the general fund together. Like that's totally fine. But this year, especially with some new accounts that they may want to budget to, I'm sure there may at least be like one additional budgeting sheet that they're pulling, or like an existing budgeting sheet where they may need to come in and change the configure filters just to account for these. So, we're not to the new special ones yet, but I want to come in and pull a sheet for these as well. So again, we could change our columns if we need to. You do need to do that on each sheet as you're creating the sheets. But the good news is that then if you use a clone option in a future year, that will stick in there with the parameters for each sheet. So it's kind of like, if you make a plan where you get everything set up one year, exactly how you want, then that could be a benefit for future years. So, oops, that's not where I wanted to move that. Okay. Um, so for this one, this is the filter that I wanted to do. So for this one, I am going to use the fund uh filter from the expenditure code, and we'll do equals 001. And then I'm gonna do a special cost center. We'll use the between filter for this. Between 9,000 and 9,999. Now this range will include the ones that end in X. So we want to exclude those somehow. The way I have is not one of. So I'm just gonna list them out. And then let's make sure that we only pull our active accounts. So active equals true. I can just put a T for true. And this looks pretty good. The other thing I should point out is if you do use advanced query on your grids or even in like the report writer is there is like a query option down here. I could load a saved query if that's something that you have in your instance. Of course, it will correspond to um, like budget or revenue, so it would have to be based on one of those like objects essentially. But um, that is a possibility down here. I just want to point that out. Okay, let's save this up. And so this is going to pull all of our general fund with the 9,000 special cost centers. We only have a few of them here, but this is kind of easy to see. So we have our special cost centers here, and we could enter budgets just for those if we wanted to. Okay, last sheet we're going to create for today. Um, let's do our special cost centers now. This probably isn't what they would call it because they won't be new forever, but for the purposes of our of our demo today, we're gonna do new special cost centers. Let's go ahead and add our columns just to be consistent here. And then on our configure filters, so what I'm gonna do is let's get our active. And we can use the expenditure filters here. So let's do the 001. And then for our special cost center, we'll use a different one. This one we're going to use like. So like we can use the wildcard with. So I'm just going to do wildcard X. So that's going to give me any special cost centers in this fund that end in X. And we'll go ahead and get that created. And this one should go pretty quick. Okay. All right. So let's look at this now. And we have two of these. So we have one created for my 917, one created for my 918 account, and I could budget to these here. Let's see. And then let me add. Let's budget 5,000 for actually let's budget 5,000 for both of these. And then we can save this up here. Now, here's where we're going to kind of like take a little sidetrack this year. And what I want to say is, what happens if that's not all the accounts that we need? We have two of them in there. Some districts may be on it. They may have already added these, within this fiscal year. They may be using them. But really, they don't. I believe next year, like 27, is when they really need to start using them. So at this point, what they may want to do is get these accounts added so that they can get the budget set for 7/1 and they can be ready in advance to budget to those. So now, for our example, because what we're looking at here is we have the 917 and 918, but let's say we have a group of accounts that we need to add for the 915X. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. And then, even though we already have our budgeting sheet for this, we'll look at updating our budgeting sheet to then include those new accounts. So let me make sure I save up my budgeting scenario. And okay. Okay. So let me go real quick. Let's go to our accounts grid and just kind of look at what we have for this. Because I have my cash accounts here. And I'll show you we don't have the 915 yet. So we have, 911. Oops, I probably should have added that to my filter, but I don't have any underlying accounts for that in my test instance. So I didn't need to add those ones. So the filter I did earlier may need a couple more things on it. So just an example. But so this will show me like what cash accounts I do have for this. So 915 is our example. 915X is going to be our example today. So you can see I don't have the cash account for this yet. So of course I don't have any like underlying appropriation or expenditure accounts or revenue accounts for that. Um, so you can see we don't have anything here. For example, we're going to add expenditure accounts, just because that makes it easy. But um, it may have revenue accounts as well, which can be added. So we're going to do an example with the expenditure load. We're going to do account with we've created an expenditure side like budget sheet, but keep in mind that these steps will be the similar. It'll just be like an additional like counterpart if there are revenue accounts that realistically in this scenario you would want to add as well. So, okay. Now, I don't have like in this data, I didn't have like a great one-to-one like example to pull these accounts from. So I'm not promising that this example makes like 100% sense with like the function that we're going to look at, but I did want to show you that if there is an account, if there is an account set within the general fund that has similar accounts to what you would want to create for that new special cost center, you can start by pulling data from your expenditure grid. Actually, let's get to our expenditure grid. You can start by pulling data from your expenditure grid to help you make the sheet that you're going to eventually load in for that new account. So you don't have to go through a spreadsheet and just like type in every new account code. So what I found is because the 915X is career tech, which I didn't have like any related accounts to that in my regular general fund. So we're just pulling, this is just like a random function that I found I had like a good amount of accounts for. So um, this has, some regular, some overtime, some retirement. This has a chart of accounts at least that has some variety in the expenditure accounts. So what I'm going to do is download this, and I can download this to Excel data or Excel field names. And also, I can use this in combination with what we have set up for a template um, for using our mass load. So I have already kind of done this on the side to make sure we don't have to do too much in this part. I'm going to show you an example, but that you would do it to Excel field names, I think has the closer headings. You can do it to Excel data if you're going to put it in the template anyway. And then you would generate based on whatever filter of like the accounts you want to kind of start with. Let's go back to the wiki. And while this loads, we'll coffee. So under the utilities, we have this mass load page. Let's go to expenditure account import. Now we have the templates here. The templates are saved in CSV. And you want to make note of that because with CSV, you do have to be careful of making sure that with like your account codes, you keep all of the leading zeros and everything. So if you're opening it in Excel, you may want to be careful with your formatting on your columns. But this is the exact template that would show all of the columns that you need. Additionally, down here we have it laid out so it shows you here's what the required fields are, here's what the format needs to be, and everything that you need to have included. So basically, when we pull so we pulled our sheet based on um, the previous, like on a previous chart of fund and functions. Um, what I did, so I have sort of a, I'm sharing, the way I'm sharing this for the training, I'm sharing my browser with you. So I've translated a couple things where we have a photo instead of like viewing directly in Excel, but um, we have, the fund code would be 001. What I would change in this is change the function. So I switched us over to a function that makes more sense for career tech. And then I changed our special cost center. So this is our new special cost center. And then obviously if there's anything else, like it doesn't necessarily have to be directly those accounts. It's whatever accounts that they actually need to make in their new fund special cost center. But this was just like a easy example for us to say, here's a good section of accounts. This may be a good starting point, I guess is what I'm saying. The other thing, I removed the description. We don't need to bring over the description from the old account. And I also added in a start date. So you don't have to do this if they did want to be using these this year, or if they already, if they are planning to, which at this point in the year, I don't think so. Um, but again, totally up to your district. But if they want a scenario where they're adding these and they're going to budget to them for next year and they don't want anybody to use them until next year, you can add a start date. So you can do this right when you create the accounts. So this is what our spreadsheet looks like. We have our headers that match up to the headers that we have for the import. And then we can go ahead, save our CSV up. And when we come in here, we can go to Utilities, Mass Load. And let me find my file here. There it is. Okay. I'm uploading this to expenditure accounts. And then I will go ahead and load this. Okay. So while this loads, I also had a note. So if there are any other accounts, or like say there's even like a fund that they want to start using in the new year, those could all be added with this process. We do have like a mass add that would create, like, say it's a new fund, it's a new special cost center within the same fund that is available. This sort of process with having a start date for the next year, that's something that can be done now. I know that we have fund change that is in the works coming out soon. So I know there's some waiting on that, but just keep in mind that is relevant specifically when there's activity in the current year, because that's going to change like current year transactions. But anything that you are doing that is just going to start in the new year and doesn't have to do with things that have transactions this year, you could use this mass load for. So we have our records loaded. Let's go back and take a look real quick. And we have our accounts added now, our start date of 7/1. So boom, those are all in here. We also that created when since we just loaded the expenditure, but that did create the appropriation and the cash level accounts here. So if you have expenditure and revenue accounts that you want to add for a new cash account, you load those two sheets and it will create the cash and the appropriation as needed. So you don't have to load like every single level of a new account. That makes it a little bit easier. And then let's go back to our scenario. And so I have my budgeting 27. Let me go ahead and edit this here. Get big again for us. So this was our new special cost centers. Now, we have this in here. If you remember, I added the 5,000 as my budget for these. So this is the other note I want to make. We want to regenerate this because now we have more accounts that meet these qualifications. And so we want those to be in this sheet. The important thing to remember when you're regenerating a sheet is that it's like starting fresh. It's like pulling new. And so if we have those amounts in there for the PA column, those are going to get erased. Those will change back to zero. So the timing of the regeneration is kind of important. But I can come in here. My filters already include those accounts. So all I have to do is come in here and save the sheet. And now this is going to go ahead and pull my new accounts. So boom, those are all in there. Let's add, oop, drag down. There we go. I think I did like 6,000. Yeah, we'll just put this there. Okay, just to get some amounts in there so we have something to look at. So we entered our PA. We can go ahead and accept that. And then actually, let's see. Okay, the next thing I want to look at here is we also can download a sheet to Excel. So we've looked at editing within here, but maybe what they want to do is download the sheet, look at it in Excel, or maybe like put it in Google Sheets, and then at that point in the process, they're going to connect with like their building leads. They're going to connect with their principals, they're going to connect with like, okay, who is responsible for these budgets? Let's get the budgets in for each of my different groupings and figure out, what those are going to be. Then I will, when I'm ready, use my upload to upload that back in. So, if I go ahead and download this, and again, I have sort of little workarounds so that we can see it in the browser window. So just give me a second here. I'm gonna bring it in. So I'm just copying and pasting exactly what I have in my spreadsheet into my Google sheet here. So, I can bring it over to a spreadsheet, Google sheet, and then I have, whatever I want. I still, again, want to fill out my PA column. I did do some formatting here, to make sure that I kept my leading zeros and everything. Um, So this is where I want to talk about the IDs. So the first column we see on here is this ID column. And I know, especially when you get this to a spreadsheet, this is one that can throw people off. They're like, what is this big long number and letters? This doesn't mean anything to me. What do I need this for? What does it do? And basically, the explanation for this is it's a safeguard that will always connect back in the budgeting sheet to the account that is listed here. So this is sort of like a background key that links to this record in the budgeting sheet. So if I were to accidentally delete data from some of my account code columns, this ID would always be able to link it back to that account code in my budgeting sheet. So, really, you only need to have either the ID, or all of your account code columns. If you have all of the account code columns, you don't really need to keep the ID, but honestly, it's good just to keep it. I would just minimize it. I think don't hide it, just minimize it. Um, and then that's there. You do want to be careful though if you are like sorting these and changing the order, make sure you also include the ID in the sort so that stays with the account that it originally was for. The other thing that sort of came up in one of our tickets last year is to make sure to remember the ID is the ID in the budgeting sheet. So it connects to this account in the budgeting sheet. If you were to go to like the account grid and the accounts do have an ID attached to them on the account grid, that isn't necessarily the same ID as the ID in the budgeting sheet. So really, yeah, I would say just if it's there, when you pull the budgeting sheet down, leave it there. If you do have all of these account codes, you could, if you don't have it, then that's okay. So that's the deal with the ID. Um, and then what we also could do, okay, so we have all of our columns here. When you're in this sheet, if there are any columns that you would want to remove, you can remove them. So if we wanted to, um, say delete some of these out of here, we could do that. So let's delete let's delete these and And then what we'll do, so I'm gonna just download this to Excel. And then when I'm ready, what I do is upload right back into the same budgeting sheet. We'll talk about the upload down here, but this one came from this budgeting sheet, so I want to upload and replace. So again, anything that I had in this budgeting sheet is going to be overwritten by what's in my spreadsheet now. Well, let me get my file. Ah, I was worried about that. Let me see my example. Hang on. I think I diverted from my previous example here, so I did. Well, you know what? I'm I'm worried about time because I have more things I want to talk about. This is something with my example. I promise you this is how it works. So if you don't mess with things when you're live on a training, um, basically what you would do if you were to just have some of the rows on there and not others, when you upload this back to your sheet, um, then it would, oh, look, it actually did kind of work here, but I got an error. So it's so it's fine. So it'll just go ahead and include just the rows that you had in your sheet. Okay, yeah. See, it does look good. Um, so this is what it would do. And so like if they were to, so say, okay, I pulled my full budgeting sheet of like all of these, I pulled in all of my active codes for the special cost center. Turns out I really only want to budget to five of them for now. So I can clean up that spreadsheet when I'm working on the budgeting in, Excel. And when I load it back in, it's much cleaner. So we'll go ahead and save that up. Let's save this. Oh gosh. I hope that's not a problem. Let's repull this. Let's regenerate this and see if we can figure this out. Because the next thing we're gonna do is promote these, and I don't want to carry forward issues. So, let's do this. I love getting errors on training. We're just gonna roll with the manual update in the software here. Okay, boom. So we've got that in there. Let's save this. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is deleting sheets. So we can delete a sheet out of here. So say, this year maybe they previously had something for the general fund, but now they want to kind of split up how they're doing this. Or, in this case, we have like a cafe fund and we want to go ahead and remove that. So I'm going to go ahead and just click X. Do I want to delete this? Yes, I do. Um, and you can delete a sheet out of there. The other thing I want to talk about before we move on to promoting, the scenarios is like a big part of it, right? I think the scenarios is where they're going to be for a while. Um, so we got a lot to a lot to talk about here. Um, but the other option is this upload option at the bottom. So third time, fourth time I'm gonna say this, multiple ways to do things, right? And really that's because it's the flexibility, right? Like all districts don't do things exactly the same way, depending on their preference, depending on their process. There are different ways to do this. So far we've all talked about creating the budgeting sheets within here, and we see these different options. But let me save this and show you that uh instead of creating through there, there is a way to make a sheet with a report definition and then upload it. So I know there are districts that do this as well. Um, so here, this part, this upload budgeting sheet part in our steps has a couple definitions that you could import to your report manager grid. So you would just click on this, it's going to download the report definition. And let's get over to our report manager grid. You can use the import report at the top here. We'll pull in that definition that I just downloaded. and we'll save that up. And then what you can do is you can generate this report now. It runs to Excel data. And let's run this. In our case, we're going to run it for the cafeteria fund. And we're going to generate that. And I believe I also have this. So that we ran it for the 006. So that is going to it pulls all of the account code options. And again, I'm looking at the expenditure side, but there's definitely a revenue spreadsheet too. So this would be an option for either or both. And then what you have on here is all of your different columns of information. These would be run based on the accounts at the time that you generate the report from your report grid, from your report manager. And then you have the PA column. And so this is where you would fill in 2027. And when you do this, so we could fill in like fill in our amounts here. This is the one where I actually wanted to delete, and then we could delete any extras that we don't want. Let's delete those. So you could kind of clean up which ones you want, which ones you don't. And then what you can do is take this spreadsheet. This doesn't have the ID column, but because it has all of the account code pieces here, we can use this with the upload. So the difference here is that instead of using that, like, generating the budgeting sheet through the scenario, you're generating it through your report grid. Now, when we upload this, it's not going to have the option to regenerate like these do. So if you ever see, here, let's upload this. Oh, you know what? This is the wrong one, I think. Why'd I go to 26? I told you 27 is like, wait, I can't believe we're there. I'm in denial. Okay, so let's do this and let's upload here. Let me make sure I choose my right file here. I believe it's this one. Okay, so you can see this doesn't have a regenerate option, and that's because we didn't make it through the budgeting sheet. It doesn't have that screen where we configured filters or anything. And so since it wasn't made that way, you can't regenerate it that way. However, if you're using all of these, if you're using these sheets that all come from a report definition, instead of regenerating, you could just go to the report manager and generate a new report. And that would have the updated figures. And that would be like the same idea as regenerating a sheet because that's also starting, from scratch with your figures at zero. So just a different way to do it, but that is totally an option. But for those of you at the ITC for, helping somebody with this and you see one district that doesn't have any regenerate options, it's because they use the upload instead. So just a different way to do that. We can look at that in here. So we still have our accounts, and then we still have our expended that came, or I'm sorry, our proposed that came in. So that is good to go. And let's go ahead and save this. So the next step we're going to do now is we're going to promote. We're going to promote these over to our proposed amounts grid. So this is the step we would take when we're like, okay, we're done kind of figuring stuff out in our scenario for now. So we want to push these over and we want these to be available as like the next year proposed amounts. So I'm going to use this arrow here, promote the scenario. This pop-up is important. This is going to replace all existing proposed amounts, expenditure, and revenue for the fiscal year related to the scenario, which is 27. So this is the reason why when we talk about having the revenue and the expenditure together in one scenario, it's important. Because if you already pushed over, say, your revenue accounts, and now I want to push over my expenditure accounts. If those aren't together in the scenario, then whatever's already over there that's not in this one will disappear. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's something that can totally be planned for so that everything is there that you need, but just something good to know. So we'll get this promoted. Let's go look at our steps. Okay, so we're promoting. We have a bunch of notes in the walkthrough about that as well. Um, I don't think this should take too long here. So let's get ourselves cleaned up. Now, what this is doing, it's collecting all of the information from my scenario and separating it out into accounts, into like rows by account. And when we go to the proposed amounts, that's going to show now in this grid. Now, what we can do is filter by fiscal year. So in this case, we're focusing on our next year budgets for 27. So I'm going to filter down so we can just see that. And then, excuse me, let's look at some of the accounts that we had entered figures for. So let's go to our special cost center. You can see we have our accounts that have our 101 budget that we put in here. We put in those 6,000s, and then we have some 006 that we have amounts for in here. Um, and so those show now. Let me show this. I'm just going to open a separate tab so that we don't have to switch around as much. If I go to our accounts now, now what I want to point out is that now that those are in the proposed amount grid, we have this next year proposed that is on the account, next year proposed. So that shows as 101. That shows the budget that we had in this proposed grid. This is the key to when we say like, okay, if it's going to be in this proposed grid or not. It needs to be in this proposed grid to show as the next year proposed on the account. That can be used, that amount is then used for like say future year POs, future year requisitions. That's the amount that it's going to reference. So that's where it can become tricky is as far as your timing, making sure you have everything you need in the scenario so that things can stay in that proposed amount grid. Um, Now, once you get to July, once you actually switch over in your new fiscal year, you're in July, that proposed grid no longer matters for the year because you don't need this anymore. That's going to end up being your budget. But this time of year, when we're doing like the initial budgeting until June, that proposed grid is going to be key to having this amount show on the account. Now we can come in here. We could add, if we had another account that we wanted to add a proposed amount for, we could do that. There's a create box. You basically pick a fiscal year, pick an account and amount. So that's possible. We can edit these if we wanted to change the amount. Um, all possible makes it really easy if that needs to happen. The key to remember is that you can re-promote a scenario, and if you need to do that, it's going to overwrite any changes in this grid too. So totally depends on the situation. If you're just doing one thing, that might be easy. But you want to keep that in mind because if you do have a situation where you're ever promoting a scenario again, it's kind of like safest to do any changes in the scenario because then you make sure you keep any differences along the way. Um, let's see. Okay. The other thing I want to show here is if we go to our posting periods real quick, I just want to show you I have January, I have February, I don't have my July period yet. So, one thing we're going to see when we go to proposed amounts is that we can apply these budgets. Now, these budgets for 2027 are going to be for July in 26, but the first period of fiscal year 27, it's going to create that period. So, So far, what we've done is done our work zone in the scenario, push them over to proposed amounts, which makes them next year proposed. However, there's one more step needed in order to actually apply those as the budgets for July, and that is this apply step. So we have to select the fiscal year up here, and then we're going to click apply. Now, when we do this, it does say this process will set temporary permanent for the selected fiscal year. If the posting period associated with the date entered does not exist, it will automatically be created by this process. So that's going to take care of making July for us to make sure these can all post. It is going to post expenditure and revenue, everything for the fiscal year that we've selected. We have a couple different types, a couple different ways we can post this. Now, for next year budgets, it'll we have temporary or permanent. Adjustment, that is for like if we wanted to make adjustments in the current year, that is on that separate walkthrough. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for now, we're going to focus on temporary or permanent. Um, so temporary budgets are typically posted first, and those will update the accounts with the initial amounts. Multiple waves of temporary budgets could be posted and applied. Those will a temporary budget will always overwrite a temporary budget. And then permanent budgets generally are applied later on. Um, those will overwrite temporary budgets. And then for permanent, a temporary budget will never overwrite a permanent budget. So you can't do it in reverse, but you could post permanent budgets multiple times. So if you post a permanent budget and something else changes, you could post as permanent again and replace that amount. That is possible. Um, Really, it kind of is for um sort of reference. I have a report I'm going to show you once we click to apply this that kind of will show you temporary or permanent. But that is totally up to them. So we're just going to do permanent. They could do permanent out the gate if they want to. It all just depends. Um, Update the gap original estimate amounts. So the very first time that this is posted and with this checked, whether it's temporary or permanent, that's going to set the original estimate for gap. On subsequent times, like if you post again as permanent, it will make a gap adjustment and keep track, so that it can show the original amount on the account as whatever the most recent permanent is. The effective date when you're posting for the full year budgets is always going to be 7/1. You can't change that. And then full year, so full year, I had looked into a bit last year. It is like a reference field. We're going to see it on the report definition that I have. It can't be unchecked when posting for permanent budgets. But if you were doing temporary budgets, you could uncheck the full year to indicate like these aren't intended to be, the lasting budgets, and they could change. So what we'll do is once you got the right selections here, you would go ahead and apply this. I will say this can take some time. So I have an alternative. We're not going to wait for this to process, but we're going to look at some things in the meantime. Um, but while this is processing, you could have another tab open and, still continue to work on other things in the software. I wouldn't go opening any of the accounts that are associated with those, but you can still let this process and work. So we have applying proposed amounts. This is our walkthrough, kind of goes through what I talked about here. The last thing that we have on the walkthrough is the report that I was mentioning. We do have a link to the public USAS reports library, and there are a couple reports in here. Oops, I'll have to update that link. That are budgeting reports. And so we have, let's see. This budgeting transactions initial estimates. If you want to see something with like the temporary versus permanent budget, this one has a good example. This one has some good fields related to that. So you can see, like, if I post my budgets, I have like, okay, this was a temporary budget. This is the amount it was marked for full year. So this can kind of help with like reviewing basically like when the budgets were applied. Oh, like the current budgets that are applied. rather because the date is gonna be 7/1, not necessarily like when they were applied. But this report can be helpful in some situations, so I just wanted to point that out as well. Um, so that is our main walkthrough of posting the budgets. Now, this is processing. What we're gonna do here is I'm gonna give us a little fast forward option because I have a second instance where I actually already applied these. So instead of waiting for this to process, we're gonna kind of go look and see, okay, here's what this looks like after these finish applying. If I can get locked in here. Okay, what? There we go. All right. So the first thing we're gonna look at is our posting periods. And you can see here, February, still my current period, but it has created July. So the only step I did in this one was let that apply finish. In addition to what we've looked at in our training today, I think I got most of my numbers similar on the accounts, so we might have a couple little bit little variants on which ones are 5,000 and which ones are 6,000, but I have similar examples in this one that we'll look at. So pretend this is, where we applied. Um, but so we have July created. Now, let's go ahead. I'm actually going to make July current because what I want to show you is when we applied those budgets, that it went and put those out there in July. So let's go to our accounts grid and we'll go to our expenditures. And we have our 915 accounts. Now, if I view this, again, I'm in July 2026. If I view this, I can see that I have my initial budget of 101. If I look at my like budgeting adjustments for my detail, so that posted my gap initial budget and it posted my initial budget, and you can see that's with my 7/1 2026 date. Now, because this is the July date, you won't see the like if I were to go back to February and view this, I'm not going to see those yet in February. This will be out there in July, sort of waiting for them to switch over. So that specifically, creating these entries right here so that it would show up here, that specifically is what our apply step did. We have, let me see. Let's just look at one of these. So here's from my cafeteria fund. I pulled those extra accounts. So again, I have my initial budget of 6,000. So this also was posted out from what we applied. So now those just sit out there. And again, if they needed to go through, in the proposed amounts, and update anything, or like maybe go back to the scenario. If they go back to the scenario, they go through all the steps. They promote the scenario, then they have to apply again, to get those in there. But yeah, that is your budgeting process for the next year. Now, the other thing that I had mentioned at the start was our adjustments process. And let me get back to where I was. We'll go back a couple times. Where we're going is our main budgeting page, kind of where we started here. Our budgeting landing page. And we have our green box. We went through these proposed amounts for the next fiscal year steps. We also have the walkthrough for current year adjustments. Now, this process, if you look through this, is going to be extremely similar. So I'm not going through all of that again. I know we're almost at like the time I told you I was going to be here before I switch over. But so this process, it's similar. You're going to make a scenario for the adjustments. Creating the budgeting sheets works the same. You have, sort of the grid. This yellow box here, though, this is the key. When you're entering adjustments, the amount that's in that PA column is very important. So let me see. I believe I have in one of my two. I have adjustments. I think, let me see. Um, I wanted to clone this one real quick. So probably you probably wouldn't clone for adjustments. For the purpose of training, though, I'm going to clone this one real quick. And for the thought of adjustments right now, we're in 26. So if I were using this right now, it would be for my 2026 fiscal year. So a couple important pieces when you go ahead and edit the data in your budgeting sheet. Number one, this has to be changed to the period that you want it to be. Now, that was kind of even better example than I planned because this date that's in this sheet, it'll always default to the next year based on my current year. So earlier when we did it, that defaulted to 27 because we were in February of 26. Now my current period is July 26, actually 27, so it defaulted to 28. So that's one of the big keys with the adjustments is that you likely will have to manually change that header when you're doing adjustments, because it automatically tries to default to like budgeting for the next year. That would be like, the standard case. So you update that. The other thing is what you enter in this field, it's not the amount you want to adjust by. It's what you want the expended amount to be. So this note right here explains that with an example. So basically, like it'll take into account what my initial budget was, it'll take into account any adjustments that I already have, and then I'm going to enter what I want the expendable amount to be. And when I apply those as adjustments, the system is going to figure out the difference of what the adjustment needs to be. So hopefully that saves a step for them on having to like calculate that out in an Excel sheet. But I also know that districts are very used to calculating what they want their adjustment to be when they enter those in. So a difference from like manually entering a budget adjustment that you will definitely want to keep in mind. Um, and then, okay, so that's all I have for budgeting. If you have any questions before we wrap up this section, put them in the chat, please. I'm gonna talk about our next couple of trainings real quick, and then we're gonna bring Lori on to do overtime. So that is coming up soon. Let me just go real quick and show you. Um, where am I going here? So we have our 2026 trainings out there. We're early in the year right now, so we've got the budgeting here. The recording will be posted on this page as well. Next week, we are planning document store migration training and overview. So that's going to be next Friday. We have our February release recap on March 6th. And then March 13th, we have a really exciting session. It's Jira creating custom dashboards. And I know Michelle and Bella are planning something fun for that where it'll be sort of like a work session. I know Jira can be a lot, so that I think will be very, very helpful. And yeah, so that's the end of this session. So I'm gonna wrap up. Lori, whenever you're ready, we can get switched over to talk about we're gonna talk about overtime, double time, blended overtime, all that good stuff. So thank you everyone for for coming and to the budgeting part of the session, and good luck this year.
All right. Thank you, Amanda.
No
Um,
problem. Okay, let me stop sharing here.
let's take about a 5-minute break. If everyone wants to stretch, grab some coffee, um, just kind of pause before we switch gears here. And let's meet back at 10:20 and we will start the overtime portion of our session this morning. All right, everyone. I think according to my Clock, it's 10:20. So we will go ahead and continue on with the overtime portion of our session this morning. Hopefully everybody is seeing the appendix in our documentation. That's what you should be seeing anyway. If you're not, please somebody unmute and speak up. What we thought we would do is just since we have a captive audience and we know there's been so many questions about overtime, blended overtime, double time, and we're all anxious to see, how that's going to look and on the reporting side and so forth. So we thought we'd take some time this morning to just cover all of those issues because the next time, you're going to see it in real time is going to be in March. So since we have all of you on this morning, we thought we'd just take a quick moment to review and cover some things and hopefully by the end of, today, seeing it, getting a feel for it, how it's going to look when it does get released, that will kind of ease everybody's, anxiousness and not, you know, uh, leave you in limbo, so to speak, any longer. So, as we've pointed out in the past, if we've put together a document that's in our appendix, it's under the useful procedures option. I apologize. I think my computer today needs a little more caffeine. It's running a little slow. So there is our One Big Beautiful Bill Act. As soon as it decides to open here. And once it opens, we have added some additional information that I wanted to point out. Anytime now. Awesome. Let's try this again. Here we go. Thank you for your patience. Under reporting overtime, under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is where I'm wanting to go. And, a lot of this is the same, and we've reviewed this, multiple times. But I did want to point out we've added anywhere there are issues linked in the answers to the questions. If it's been assigned a release, then we've actually added that in the documentation. So you can see here, this JIRA issue is scheduled to be on the, 2026.1 release. So if you're reading through those explanations, if it's assigned to a release, we've included that as well. Just it might help, clear up when this is coming, when to look for it, etc. Down at the bottom, we've also added some additional questions and answers regarding double time. We've had a slew of questions about double time. And so now that we have some, sort of solid answers to the way that's going to look, the way it should be reported, we've included that information in the questions at the bottom. So question 18, how should double time be paid to properly be reported on the employee's W-2? So districts can, use a payroll payment future or current entry with the type of overtime, and then, they would change the rate to be the proper value. So probably, 2 times their unit amount that's on their compensation, and then they can pay the double time that way. When it comes to how it's going to be reported or how it's going to look on the employee's W-2, they want to keep in mind that per this One Big Beautiful Bill Act, only the 0.5 is considered exempt. So even though they're paying, 2 times that rate, only the 0.5 is considered exempt when it comes to the reporting side. So only 0.5 will be listed on the employee's W-2. Okay, we have a link to, the act itself, that addresses, the 0.5 is what's considered to be exempt. So if, your district personnel, has any questions as far as, the double time reporting, you can point them to this link. Lastly, we've added a resource. So we've added a resource section. And the first resource that we've added is a PowerPoint presentation. And that's kind of gonna step us, what we're gonna step through next. And it gives us examples of overtime, blended overtime, and double time. So I'm gonna click on that link now. And it's going to step us through an example of the look and feel, each step of the way, so to speak. So when we talk about, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. The other first 3 slides are going to address all of the overtime, or we've tried to capture all of the overtime issues, whether it be, those in the core project or those that are feedback issues. When it's, dealing with overtime, double time, blended overtime. We've linked the JIRA issue on the left-hand side, giving you a brief description. And then we've also, if it's been assigned to a release, we've noted that as well. So as you step through the first 3 slides here, that's going to give you, like I said, an overview of any issue that's dealing with, overtime, so to speak. Okay. Next then, as I mentioned before, what we've done is we've provided an overtime example, a blended overtime example, and a double time example. And this then will step us through how it's going to look on the compensation. So here's a screenshot of the compensation. And again, this is an overtime example. The unit amount rate is 17.68. So that's how it looks on the compensation. I know the screenshots might be a little hard to see. I can try to make it a little bigger here. So here's how the payment then would be posted in payroll payments current or future. So in this case, the unit amount is 17.68, and then it's going to be time and a half. So an overtime rate would automatically be populated for the rate of 26.52, which is 1.5 times 17.68. And then, in this example, the overtime rate of 26.52 times 2 hours, that's how many hours of overtime they had, would give them a gross of 53.04. And then again, if this is something that they want included on the employee's W-2 report, we want to make sure that that FLSA overtime field is set to include, or included is the actual field name. So that's how the payment side would look. Next, how's it going to look on the pay report? So again, it's just, going to give them an overtime line with the 2 hours, at that overtime rate for a gross amount of 53.04 as the gross. And then next, how will it look on the W-2 report? Well, the position, we're assuming the position is set to non-exempt. We had the payment side set to be included. So now it will be reported on the employee's W-2. So again, it's just the 0.5 that's included on the W-2. So that's calculated at the rate of, 17.68 times 0.5 is, 8.84 times 2. So that's going to give us the amount of the 17.68 that's reported on the employee's W-2. Sorry, I didn't have that screen kind of open enough for you guys to see that second line here. But we do have that spelled out on the slide. All right. Lastly, then, how's it going to look on the employee's direct deposit? So there is going to be a change to the total number of work hours because I know that that's been a pain point, and those hours have been inflated. So once the release that goes out that includes the update for the total hours worked, the hours, rest assured, the hours worked value should be correct for all of these scenarios. So you can see here that the employee worked 88 regular hours. They had 2 overtime hours, so that gives them a total of 90 hours worked. All right. Any questions when it comes to the overtime example before we move on to the blended overtime? All right, I don't see anything in the chat. So we'll move on to the blended overtime. Again, we're going to walk through the same sort of screenshots. So we have this example of the compensation where the unit amount is $21.11. So in this case, the payroll payment, current or future entry, in this example, we've kind of spelled it out here. They had 30 regular hours at the $21.11 amount, and then they had a total of 17.25 hours of overtime, and those entries were at $20 an hour. So to calculate the blended overtime rate, you take the hours at the, one rate, and then the total hours at the other rate, and you add those together, and then you divide that amount by the total number of hours. So that gives us $20.71. We take $21.71, and we take that times 0.5 to get the blended overtime 0.5 rate of 10.36. And then for our example, they had 7.25 hours of this overtime, blended overtime. So we take 10.36, that's the blended overtime rate, times the total number of overtime hours, and that gives them a gross of $75.11. Okay, so you can see here the blended overtime. If that makes it any better. Blended overtime pay type for the 7.25 hours. And then that gives them, the total gross of 75.11. Again, make sure that this amount then, is set to be included. And then this is how it would look on the pay report. And you can see here, I just added, when I added the entry, I added a description to note that this is blended overtime, maybe to make that a little more clear to the employee. Districts might have their own way of noting that, but I added that in the description as B overtime. Now, how does this look on the W-2 report? So you can see here that the entire amount is reported on the employee's W-2. So for blended overtime, we're taking the entire value and that gets placed on the W-2 report. So if there's any, differences that need to be reported, that's when we would need to use an adjustment to change that amount. All right. And then when it comes to the direct deposit, I think you'll all be happy to see that, here's the regular hours of 54. Here are all of the miscellaneous entries for the extra time that they worked. And then here's that blended overtime amount. And you can see here, if you add up 54, 12, 7.75, and 11, that equals 84.75. So this 7.25 amount is not being included in the total hours worked because they're already accounted for here. All right. Okay. Any questions on blended overtime? I did want to point out before we jump into our last example here, we are going to be very soon releasing a tool that I think users are gonna be elated over, and that's a blended overtime calculator. Okay, so under utilities, there's going to be a new option called blended overtime calculator. And what this is going to allow them to do is to basically find the employee. Hopefully everybody can see this here. Trying to make it a little bigger so you can see it. Whoops. All right, so you would find the employee. That's going to then list all the available compensations. And you can see here, you can even include archived compensations if you'd like. So you're going to find the compensations that apply to this situation. You're going to move those positions to the selected side, and that's then going to populate all this information in the grid below. So you can see if I scroll down, once I've selected these, the positions that apply for this blended overtime, they're populated below, and then I can start filling in then the total hours and the rate. Once I hit calculate, it's doing all the work for me. So it's going to generate all the information down below. Kind of got ahead of myself here, sorry. So you can see an example of how that information, once we populate it, it's going to, once we hit calculate overtime premium, it gives us all of the information then that we would then use to enter the information into payroll payments, future or current. Okay, so I think districts are going to love this. This is just the beginning. We know that it would be super helpful to be able to run a report off of this tool. Actually, be able to click a button and then generate the information automatically in payroll payments, future or current, or download a file that you'd be able to upload. All of that is going to be forthcoming. This is just a start. Okay, so hopefully this helps, because I know that this has been a long time in the making, and with this being such a hot topic now, we've kind of moved this to the forefront and have something in place for them to begin using. Okay. All right. I see some comments that, yes, it is very exciting, and hopefully this will be very well received and you very helpful to all. All right, I'm going to hop back to our PowerPoint here if there aren't any other questions, which I don't see any. And we're going to go through our last example here, which is for double time. And I think this has, been a hot topic of late. So hopefully we can, seeing this example will help put all those questions to rest. So in this example, this employee has a compensation unit amount of $15.32. They have some, 2 hours of double time. So $15.32 times two, or double their rate is $30.64. And then $30.64 times 2 hours is $61.28, that they should be paid. So we have this, in this example, on this highlighted line here. Again, make sure that the FLSA overtime field is drop down is set to included. On the pay report, you can see that, they have changed the rate to $30.64. So that's how this entry looks, on the pay report as well. On the W-2 report, what's going to be reported then, again, is remember, only the 0.5. So even though, we have, that double time rate being paid, we're only going to report the 0.5. So again, if we take their unit amount rate, 15.32 times 0.5, that's 7.66. And then $7.66 times 2 is $15.32. That's the amount then that's listed on the employee's W-2 as qualified overtime. And then on the direct deposit, again, you can see that, they had one entry for their regular hours of 51, 0.75. They had 2 hours of overtime, and then those two added together equal the total amount worked of 53.75. All right. Are there any questions when it comes to double time? I think I see something in the chat here. So that is correct. So when you're using the overtime type and you're using, and that entry is set to included, that is correct, Sharon. The system will automatically go back and calculate using the compensation rates and then the 0.5 times the hours. So that is correct. So double time or time and a half. And, that's why we kind of spelled out the, in this PowerPoint, the different scenarios so that it's clear. Okay. Now, one thing that districts are going to want to be careful of is if they're using overtime for a situation, the overtime pay type, I should say, for situations where they may be working outside of their normal day, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're working over 40 hours. Okay, and I know that that's been, that is, the case per their negotiated agreement, that if they work, outside their normal, 7.5 hours, whatever it may be, it might not necessarily mean they're working, over 40 hours for the week. They're being paid overtime for that amount of time. So that probably is a case where it's not going to be FLSA reportable. So they will want to make sure that when they're making that, payment using the overtime pay type, that they mark the FLSA as, not included so that that amount doesn't get excuse me, reported on their W-2. Okay. And then the last thing I just wanted to, make sure that everybody's aware of is we do have that, those two report options. So until the report, and it is, one of the items that's listed, if I scroll back up here, there is going to be a new overtime report option added. And that's the first item here listed. But until this gets released, it looks like it's scheduled on the 2026.6 release. We do have a couple reports out in the report repository. So if you go under the report repository and we go to the calendar year end option, and I get, again, I apologize, my computer's a little tired this morning. Under the report, the calendar year-end reports, there are two different report options available. So one, if it ever comes up here, maybe it's on another screen. Give me 1 second. And it is. So again, in the report repository, the public shared report library, under calendar year end, there are two different reports available. So if I click on the calendar year end based reports and I go down eventually, okay, here, maybe. Goodness sakes, doing a lot of thinking. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to the calendar year end based reports. And these two reports here are two reports that might be helpful until that new overtime report is released for districts to use. Okay. So they can download these, they can run these, and hopefully that will provide them the information between the two reports that they're needing. All right. Okay. I think there's one more question. Will there be options to do core adjustments to fix misentered? Absolutely. Great question. So if you go under core adjustments, there is a type that's available. If I click create here, there is a type called W-2 overtime. And actually it looks like we have an example here. So I'll just bring this one up. So it would be W-2 overtime would be the type that you would use. And then you can enter the amount, positive or negative, to adjust the total that's being reported to what what the user wants reported. So it's not an override. It's going to adjust it based on that positive or negative amount. So whatever they need, whatever it's off by, basically, they would enter the value to adjust it as a positive or negative. Great question.
Lori, that core adjustment, is that still looking to box 14? And will there be a new core adjustment to go to box 12 TT?
So it will move the changes going forward will move the adjustment will be applied to box 12 code TT. So 2025 was the only way that we could, get anything reported on the W-2. But for 2026 going forward, this overtime adjustment will do the trick.
Good deal. Thank you.
Okay. And then, as far as when the overtime calculator will be available, I'm going to hop back to because I don't have all this memorized, but we do have that as one of our issues listed. And I think it's 2026.2 if I'm remembering correctly, but let's double check. If I can move forward in my slide here. I think my computer is saying it is time for the weekend to start. I lied, it's even sooner. So it's 2026.1. So very soon. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Lord, I have a question. So most of our districts use a daily. I apologize. I don't have my mic right. Most of our districts use a daily unit amount. Is the system going to take that divided by hours in a day to determine the 0.5 to be reported when using the overtime pay type, or is that something we need to suggest to them to change in the compensation?
Yeah, I will double check on that, but I'm almost positive currently it's only referencing hourly.
Okay.
But let me double check
Okay.
because
And
I
then,
don't want to misspeak.
okay. Okay.
I
Um,
will double check on that.
And just for my understanding, for the double time purposes, when using overtime pay type, the system will know to calculate a 0.5 because it looks at the compensation unit amount, which would be an hourly rate, which is probably why they need to have an hourly, you know,
Absolutely.
type in the compensation. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I think that if they're using a daily, it's gonna look at that value and then the calculation
Well,
that's placed on the
oh,
W-2 is gonna be
incorrect.
incorrect.
Okay. Cool.
But I will double check that, but I'm
Okay.
almost positive. I don't know that we've taken it one step further to divide like the daily rate by the hours in the day, but I'll double
Okay.
check on that because I don't want to misspeak.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions. All right. Anything else? Okay, again, we thank everyone for staying with us this morning and all your time. We know that it's very valuable and we just wanted to get this information out to you, sooner than later. We know that, you've all been getting bombarded with questions and we we want to keep you as up to date and current on, you know, information that we know about everything we know about overtime and not make you wait. So again, appreciate you staying with us and hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, extended weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.